One. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Python Community News, the show that brings you the non-pip installable news around the Python community. Uh, as always, I'm one of your hosts, Jay Miller, and with me is...
I'm Jon Banafato.
Hey, John, how's it going this week?
Good. How are you, Jay?
Good. We don't have as many topics this week, and I think that's fine because I think the topics that we do have are maybe not the meatiest, but I'm going to have questions. Um, there's going to be a lot to kind of discuss in some extents. So without further ado, let me do the thing that I should have done earlier by sharing my screen, and we can jump into the first topic, which you brought, which is about some folks diving in on that PyPI benefit.
Yeah. So this is I guess, kind of an update to a thing we talked about uh, a while back. But over the summer, PyPI ran a promotion, a giveaway for PyPI users. So anybody who has an account on the Python package index to get free Google Titan hardware tokens, security keys to enable two-factor authentication on their PyPI accounts. So initially, this applied to maintainers of what they called critical packages, and they defined those as packages that had the top 1% of downloads, I believe. And over the course of the giveaway, they rolled that out to more users. Super interesting updates here are that through the course of that giveaway, the number of users that had two-factor authentication enabled on their accounts went up by 3,000. So that was about 10%. And they also gave away 1,600 hardware security keys to users that were eligible, throughout the promotion. And then a bunch of projects also require 2FA now.
Yeah, you mentioned the thing of like, if we look at it just above board, we have 31,000 folks that now, or projects that have 2FA enabled, or I guess users that have 2FA enabled, and 4,000 projects with 2FA enabled. I Oh wait, no, I'm reading this wrong.
Yeah,
I'm like trying to read the tweet and think about what you said and then do all the things
those
at
are
once.
the
Yeah.
4,000 of the critical projects.
Yeah.
The 440 projects that require 2FA now.
Yeah. So when you look at this, there's like 8,500 users roughly there, and they said this was an increase of, what, 6 times, 6x. If that would have meant that if there were like, I don't know, like it's so many like numbers of like, I thought that this was a good thing. I thought that this was like, in the grand scheme of things, you got more people enabling 2FA. You've got more more projects in general, not even the most critical ones, which I think is interesting because when I would think of, sure, you want to aim for the critical ones, but if you're an attacker, maybe if you go for something that's too critical or too in the spotlight, to me, it's like, find the thing that no one's thinking about and like attach to that. But the fact that of all of these things, they added, they sent out 1,600, and out of the grand scheme of it, 3,000 new users turned on 2FA. To me, the campaign was successful, but what I get that there could be a problem with only 400 unique projects saying, okay, we're going to do this.
Uh, yeah, so I think that the campaign itself was successful in increasing usage of 2FA. And to contextualize this a bit, 2FA doesn't inherently require a hardware token,
Yeah.
right? So if you're using Google Authenticator, or if your password manager has a 2FA support feature built into it, right, you can use these TOTP style um, two-factor authentication tools as well, but the hardware token gives you some additional security on top of that. The main benefit there, from my point of view, is that it's much stronger against phishing attacks, right? Just
Yeah.
because of the way that these these schemes work, your browser can verify that um, the site that's sending the 2FA request is the correct one. Uh, Whereas if you're using, like, the code that you would get from Google Authenticator, or you know if you have some other accounts where you get like a text message based 2FA, right? Those can be phished by having kind of a man in the middle site that takes that code and passes it through, right? And the hardware tokens prevent that. The browser actually validates it for you. So if you end up on a different site, right, that looks like no, really, this is PyPI.com, right? The hardware token will return back a different response when you try to authenticate with it. So you can't pass that response along through to the real site. It uses the site as part of its verification there. So that's a big benefit. But so we've got 1,600 hardware keys that were distributed, and I believe these went out, right, two per user. So a bunch of these users that enabled 2FA uh, may not be using hardware tokens. Maybe they weren't eligible for the giveaway, or for whatever reason didn't get their tokens. They still increase the security of their own account, and then by extension PyPI as a whole, by enabling 2FA through a software method.
Yeah. So effectively, like, even if the package itself, or publishing the package, is, I don't want to say insecure, because it's not insecure, but even though that there's more that could be done at the package level, having the users themselves increase the security on their side and their authentication side is at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's one of a bunch of steps, right?
Yeah.
And these are a group of steps that involve everyone from end users to library maintainers to the PyPI admins themselves enforcing things like this, right? That that all kind of additively determine the security of the Python ecosystem,
Yeah.
right? And so uh, one of the dangerous things here of not having two-factor authentication on your account is if you end up getting your account compromised, someone malicious gets access to your PyPI account, they can then go push malicious versions of any packages you maintain, for example, right? So this is that's the sort of thing that this not approach this initiative is aiming to prevent against. But there are also things that you can do as an end user, right? If you are using some of the features that pip supports, for example, like hash checking mode and pinning all of your dependencies, right? You can prevent those malicious versions from ending up in your environment when you don't expect them to. So it's a big kind of, if we take a step back, there's a much bigger picture here, and this is only one of the things that PyPI has done to increase security. There are also things that they do really regularly, like they take down malicious packages. They
All
have
the
a
different
block.
audits they do as well.
Yeah. They audit packages. They have a block list that they maintain for kind of like typo squatting attacks. So I think one of the most common ones is people try to register things like requirements.txt
Yeah.
as a Python package name. So if you forget the -r, suddenly you've got this package in your environment that's doing something bad, uh, and right, you can't do that through PyPI.
Yeah. Also, just for fun, I know that the team at Microsoft has done a lot to protect pip install Microsoft. You can do it, but what you wind up getting is a nice little ASCII GIF artwork of Clippy. So anyone that's looking for a little Easter egg there, yeah, there you go. I I like this because I think that ultimately it's again, this is just one thing in the plethora of other things that PyPA is doing to make sure that people are as safe as possible. And I mean, again, we're the people that are enthusiasts on this and want to learn more about it. I have talked with some people that actually are a part of of PyPA, and they've agreed that they're going to come on the show probably in a future episode. We don't have a date set yet, but there will definitely be some people that can talk into the details of all of these efforts that they're making. And if you want that, let us know. Let us know on social media and tell us about it. But let's move on to the next topic, which is one that uh, I brought to the table, and I thought about this for two reasons. One, I have done a lot of speech to text projects in my day. I love doing speech to text stuff, just nature of podcasting. But I also like doing things that have an accessibility tie into them. And the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign are actually kind of combining both of these. And they have teamed up with some heavy hitters in machine learning and in speech to text. That includes, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, and they are working to make speech to text accessible for people that have verbal disabilities, people who might have a stutter or a stammer, people who may have challenges with using their voice, or they have to use voice assistants instead. And they're working to bring a diverse data set. They're actually taking volunteers as well. Um, and they're going to build training models off of these data sets to make sure that a lot of these speech to text algorithms take those verbal impairments in account. John, what did you think about this?
I think it's a super interesting project. There was also a recent tool released by OpenAI that uh, has been doing speech to text. That these tools are all getting much more accurate than they used to be. They're still uh, kind of far off on some aspects, and this is a thing I've seen particularly. And Jay, you've done a bunch of work in this space too, with doing things like captioning live or not conference talks with like technical topics. Makes it a really difficult uh, kind of domain to apply these tools against, because there's all this jargon and some interesting uh, kind of abbreviations and acronyms that end up in these recordings, right? That make it usually a challenge for these software tools. But I'm super interested in knowing kind of where this is going to go in terms of um, right licensing and things like that. Have they provided information on right who will be able to use these?
So they haven't given out an actual like, oh, here's a license model. I think they're announcing that this is a project that is going underway. But with that, the thing that I like about this is with all of the primary speech to text algorithm services, like I've used AWS Transcribe, I've used Microsoft Speech to Text, Google Speech to Text. Um, I mean, we look at the commercial products as well of like all of these people have, you know, speaking assistants, but my hope is that because they're working on a machine learning algorithm on this and not just like a private, if it were like one company, I would be thinking like, okay, it might be like some private product or something and that's it. But because everyone's getting access to this, my hope is that we will see this extend into those services as well, which are the same services if you're using a tool like Descript, or if you're using a tool like um, or even a secondhand service. I know there are a few that have like their own, like they piggyback off of the transcribe service, and then they add their own dictionary sets to make them more applicable to whatever, group. And even things like OpenAI, like I think that have the ability to do this. And that project for, there's a project for journalists that we talked about, like Whisper, or Stage Whisper, that is a Python project that I could even see benefiting from this as well, to where they're talking about multiple languages. But it's only the beginning here. And the thing I like about these types of news posts, and the reason that I wanted to add it especially, is that this is going to affect people in the Python community in different ways. Again, I've talked to people, and I didn't ask them for permission, so I'm not going to throw their name out there. But I know that there are like some of my favorite talks are from someone that is suffering with Parkinson's disease, and the issue in that is that you're engaged in the talk and you're trying to understand and comprehend at the same time, and these tools will help with that. And that to me is like a, rising tide lifts all ships kind of moment of like, hey, at your conference, if you can't afford, a stenographer, and you go with a, auto generated version of transcriptions, this becomes a better tool for people who have very recognizable speaking disabilities. But it also makes it easier for those who are comprehending what's being said as well. My hope is that as an academic project, it will remain open to the public to use and to learn from. I mean, I can't promise that it will be. They haven't said anything yet. I was actually looking at this, um, but it did say that it's, they're committing to leveraging the data and making it, and helping to people make, improve. I'm trying to read it here again. I'm struggling to read today. The speech accessibility project is committed to leveraging project data to make improvements within their respective voice recognition products and services. I'm hoping that that's going to be a sign that we will get to use and we will get to benefit from this as well.
Yeah, I'm really curious what open source tools are out there that people can use today. I mean, are there really
Hmm.
any?
I haven't seen many. I don't think I've seen any technically. Like if you're talking about, just to clarify, are you talking about like speech to text in terms of accessibility?
I meant speech to text kind of as a competitor to, right,
Mm.
these right, Amazon has their uh, AWS version of it, and I'm sure a bunch of big players have their own kind of internal speech to text tools. But right, if I wanted to build out a tool that used something like this today, and I wanted to leverage open source or otherwise free software,
Mm.
um, right? Are there any options really out there?
I'm not sure, and that's actually a good something to look into. I think the challenge with that, I've seen some like different corpuses and like things of like, oh hey, here's like an index of all the spoken words, but that's usually involving written text, not verbal. So or not speech. So I'm also interested in that now, and I'm like, hmm. I feel like the challenge with that is any form of these kinds of models have to have some form of training data. And even with, we in a world where deep fakes are a thing, and or even commercially viable deep fakes, you have to train that model on a voice. And the thing that works with most of these commercialized services is that they just have so many variations of voice that like there isn't much training that's required. But that's also where a lot of the errors come in, is because they don't have a specific training set to someone's voice. So I could see where there could be a problem, but I also feel like there might be a solution that's like, okay, let's train on this person's voice. Let's have them say these 100 or 1,000 words. And then from there, we can now do speech to text for this person really well, and it's all open source.
Yeah, I know that Mozilla has a project that aims to gather voice samples and things like that. But right, if I were to say want to grab this and use it in an open source project, um, I don't know how to do that today. Whereas I do know how to be like, okay, well,
I'm going to pass an audio file in and get some
yeah.
text back. Yeah.
Um, so I think uh, it's a really interesting thing, and I really hope that it does end up in a more open format, right? So that it can be a lifts all ships kind of thing, as opposed to right. There are a couple of tech giants that are involved in this project, and if it all ends up kind of locked behind their gates, it makes it more difficult for individuals or smaller companies or even right open source projects and nonprofits uh, to build on top of that and make it available to more people in a freer way.
Yeah. And again, this last part of the AMA that they have on here, or the FAQ, is will the data be available to other researchers? And the answer is yes. The goal for this project is to support a wide range of efforts to make voice recognition technology more useful. To me, that says even if not the end result is given, the data itself will and should be available at least to other researchers. And I mean, just in a space where like usually you have to get grants and funding for projects like this, which is why I'm sure that having major companies attached to it means that maybe your funding problem is resolved. But my hope is that I'm hoping that University of Illinois will do the sharing, and the end result will just be that all the commercialized products will also be available. But if the college or the university is responsible for the data set itself, I don't see why they would have any reason to not share those results.
Yeah, recently, and this is sort of tangentially related, the federal government here in the U.S. Uh, announced that they were going to be requiring publicly funded research to be publicly accessible.
Yeah.
So, um, you know, I don't know exactly what comes out of that, right? I don't know if it's like here's the paper that's involved and that and that's what you get, or if it's really like, hey, here's the model that we built as part of our research project, and maybe some other trading data. It'll be really interesting to see how those two things kind of overlap.
Yeah. You know what else is going to be really interesting, John?
What's that, Jay?
Python 3.11. That's going to be really interesting. And interesting enough, we have some smiling faces, which tells me that things are hopefully going well. But the CPython core dev sprint uh, has wrapped up, and this time Google hosted it. I know a few of these faces. I work with them, and I was getting a lot of out of offices, and now I know why. Um, it's it's one of these things that we don't think of that often. But I've actually had the privilege of talking to Guido about this and saying, like, how does the core team collaborate? And the answer is what you would expect, a lot of issue tracking and comments and things like that. But then ultimately there are a couple of sprints every year where there's a big push to get things done, a big push to understand and coordinate and talk with each other. And this was the second one. Normally there's one at PyCon, and then this is the second one that's around the wrapping up of Python 3.11, and probably even talking a lot about what's coming up in 3.12 and other things. And we weren't there, so we can't speculate. But John, how familiar are you with the C Python core dev life cycle, I guess?
Pretty much not at all. I have filed a bug or two with the issue tracker, but beyond that, yeah, I know that these sprints happen, and they're often talked about. Right, there are uh, blog posts and such that come out of, right. Here's what was done at PyCon and all the things that were discussed there. But yeah, I'm pretty far removed from the actual core developers and C Python itself.
Yeah, you know, my thought is that most people are probably even less informed than we are. I mean, luckily we attend things like PyCon and other conferences, and we have we know who a lot of core developers are. We can just ping them and ask them questions when we have them. But I think one of the reasons that I was happy to do a show like this was that, like, hey, that gives me more of a reason to dive in and learn about these individual, these types of things. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't think about unless they are, deeply involved in the Python ecosystem is, like, how does 3.11 come to be? How does, what's the planning cycle for that? So I wanted to kind of give people this glimpse into what that cycle looks like, but also why it's important that these types of sprints happen. So I'm going to start with, PEP, which is, the like, what is it? The Python Enhancement Proposal, which is just a way to say, here's a thing that I think would make Python better. Quite literally, that is what an enhancement proposal is. It is I have this idea for what should be in the next version of Python, and then in subsequent versions from then on there. And let's say we want, every time someone goes and types in Python enter, you know an ASCII art of a cat appears. I have the ability to suggest this. This is a thing that I have the possibility to do. But then I need to do, like, the justification. Like, all right, hey, why does ASCII art of a cat need to appear every time you type in Python? And I said, well, all the version information, while it's important, I guess, it's just not as important as me feeling good to see, like, ASCII art of a cat. And that's why I think that should be there. And then they say, okay, well, how would this impact new users? Well, I mean, they would be happy because, again, ASCII art of a cat. How would this break the existing experience of all of the other versions of Python that exist? Well, I don't know. There might be some issues there. And then on top of all of that is what is the actual implementation details to some extent that would make this a reality? And all of this has to be identified in this proposal. What's your timeline of this? Once you've done that, it has to go into voting. And trust me, there are going to be a lot of people that want to vote on this. Probably voting no, but it ultimately gets brought to the steering council, which, for those that are unfamiliar, Python was created by Guido van Rossum, who was the benevolent dictator for life until he retired from that position, and then a steering council, which was put in place using this exact same process, uh, was added, and now they make the decisions and they get to decide ultimately, is this a thing going forward that we're going to work on? Once that happens, then you have the arduous task of implementing that code into CPython, testing it, testing it a lot, making sure it doesn't break anything, making sure any changes that you make, are going to interact well, that they fit within that schema, they fit within those standards. And I'm making this all sound like this is happening in the course of a few days. This process takes months and sometimes years. We talked about it in one of the previous episodes about the faster C Python team and like this plan on how to improve the performance of Python. That stemmed from a project that Mark Shannon wrote about, I want to say during Python 3.8, 3.8, 3.9 maybe. And the first implementation of that plan isn't being seen until Python 3.11. So that's a 2-year process. And a lot of these things happen like that. Eric Snow's working on subinterpreters. This is a thing he's been working on for 4 years of like doing all of these things. So looking at all of that process, you have a very methodical process that ensures that Python 1 gets the features that they need, prioritized by the features that are being brought in, and also that they're not breaking things, like I will break our website from time to time because, hey, I added a thing, forgot a comma, didn't have a test written for it, syntax error, boom, everything is broken. You can't have that happen with Python, in the entire interpreter. That's a bad idea. So you go through that process, you're checking, you're double checking, you're triple checking, and then finally it's scheduled for release to where then it goes into beta and people find more bugs with it, and then you have to work on these things. It's at these sprints where a lot of each of these steps take place. Hey, we have a collection of, and I'll throw the picture back up. We have a collection of core developers here, and we can all sit down and talk about why ASCII art of a cat would be beneficial or not beneficial to Python, 3.12. And they would sit down and they would have this discussion, and people will have differing opinions. They'll have different execution ideas. They'll have different concerns raised. Some people are more focused in scientific Python, others not so much. They might be thinking about, web frameworks. And ultimately, it's this that helps build those processes. And remember, these only happen twice a year. And that's where when we see these posts and we see these publishes, like this is the moment where now I would say, if you know who these core developers are, I can only like look at some of the picture and I say, okay, I see Marietta, I see Guido, I see, a few others, I see Pablo. And it's like, I need to be following those individuals now. I need to be checking the CPython repo on GitHub and like looking to see some of these conversations, because out of these sprints will be the next 2 or 3 versions of Python.
I guess that brings up a really a point about how can the average Python user, stay up to date with these things, right? If they're being worked on, right, years in advance, if somebody comes up with a proposal that says, all right, well, by 2026, we want Python to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Where can I go to actually keep informed about changes that might happen and are happening to the Python language?
So I think there's a couple of places. I mean, one, I'm just going to tell people like, if you follow these people on Twitter, they are actively talking about these things. Also, if you're following the CPython repo, there are plenty of issues that get filed. There is the actual PEP system that you can look at, and that is, to my knowledge, I know that there is a way that you can see PEPs coming in, and it's called the. I'm gonna bring it up on the screen now. Uh, peps.python.org. This is, at PEP 0, you have the index of enhancement proposals, and you have some meta PEPs, you have some informational stuff. And if you're a developer and you're getting into Python just, recently, and you hear phrases like, oh, PEP 8 compliant, or Zen of Python, these are PEPs. These are things, and actually I saw Zen of Python in here, which is why I thought about it. But yeah, like, PEP 8 is style guide for Python code from Guido, from Warsaw and Koglin. And then if you're doing some form of like C Python development, there's PEP 7. And there's like all of these processes get outlined here, and new PEPs come in all the time. There is a very long list of these PEPs and a list of all the people who have contributed to them. But I do believe that there's an RSS link that you can just subscribe to here. And now any new PEP that comes in, which I have added, the latest one, PEP 699, is remove the private dict version field added in PEP 509. And again, this is why this system exists. Of like, hey, there's this thing that got added this one time. Maybe we remove it now. So I would say if you want the immediate, like, here's where PEPs are started, then that is the place to do that. Again, I also mentioned, let me go to, there's github.com, CPython. That's, well, okay, well, I'm not sure anymore.
It is it's Python / CPython
Python
is the
CPython. There we go.
yeah.
I was like, that doesn't make sense. So then you can see all 5,000 issues, 6,703 issues that are currently open. And as you see some of these things, some of these are bugs. Again, some of these are labeled. So I would say definitely you want to look at the labels. You're definitely looking at things like awaiting merges. And that will give you this idea of like, okay, what's happening? Here's something about, an adaptive argument, which my guess is that's probably for the specialized adaptive interpreter that's coming in 3.11. So to me, those are the two best places, but that is if you are very, very invested. If you do a podcast where it requires you to know this kind of information, to me, I think the real answer there is find some core devs, make sure you're following them. They love to talk about the things that they are working on. And that's not even a dig at them. That is, I enjoy talking to them about these things. So often you can, if you just ask them, they will say, oh, I'm working on this with these 3 other people. And there's like, hey, now there's 3 other people that I can follow and like see what they're talking about. I think that's going to be the way that you get introduced to some of these changes that are going to be coming in the next few years.
And I know that the language summit at PyCon US often ends up with a series of blog posts on the Python Foundation blog. Should we expect something like that to come out of these core developer sprints?
I don't think that you're going to get much from, the PSF. You're not getting much from the PSF on these. But you probably will see a lot of those individual, core developers. if they are the blogging type, you might catch them dusting off the blog for, hey, let's talk about some of these features and what it's actually going to take. That's one of the things I've really enjoyed as I've gotten to know some of these core developers more. And I am not, I want to make sure people aren't getting the wrong idea. I am not a core developer. I don't want to pretend to be one. It seems like a very challenging job at times. But what I often do is just jump in and ask, and often they will point me to a blog post that they wrote or a gist that they wrote, or some proposal, or as the faster C Python team has it, just a repo of ideas that are just at the starting point of how to embark on this. But I would say I don't think the PSF is going to talk much about it, but I think you'll see the contributors themselves, the core devs themselves. I think they would definitely check it out. Speaking of things to check out, we got asked, and this is why this podcast exists. We actually received a request from one of the organizers of a really cool conference that I just learned about earlier this year, and that's PyCon Japan. That's going to be next week. If you are in the if you're in Japan, then absolutely. If you can figure out how to make it to the venue, I believe it is in Tokyo. I believe it is in Tokyo. I could be wrong. Um, I am not sure what their virtual uh, presentation is going to be this year, but the organizers of the conference reached out to us. Speaking of core developers, there's one there, Mark Shannon. He was the one that wanted to get the Faster C Python project going. There's going to be a lot of great talks there. And I want to give a shout out personally to the organizers of PyCon Japan, because I've had the privilege of talking with them at PyCon US, and they're very passionate. They have so many amazing and like unique ideas that just come out of like straight out of Japanese culture, which I don't know how many people are familiar with watching variety shows or seeing like variety videos from like Japanese television shows. They are a blast. They're absolutely amazing. And PyCon Japan as an organizing body embraces a lot of these things. So if you are in the if you're in Japan, and I do believe that they are doing virtual tickets, I just don't know, and I don't want to lie to you. But especially if you're in Japan, go ahead and grab your ticket, go hang out. There's an official party. I don't know what this official party is. I want to know more about it, but it looks like there's a lot of things that can be done there. And yeah, go check that out. And John, I don't know if we had any other conferences, did we?
Well, around I guess the week after next is going to be DjangoCon. Right? You got
Yeah.
your ticket yet?
Uh, yes, I do have my ticket. I will be there. I will be speaking. Actually, I found out that there's some schedule changes, so the speaker list did change. I'm still on it. They didn't kick me out yet, but yeah, DjangoCon isn't this coming week, but it'll be the following week. And I'll see what I can do. I would love to have some interviews from some of the folks that were there. I can't promise we'll do this for every conference unless they want to buy me a plane ticket and a conference ticket and cover hotel. And then yeah, I'll just be the traveling guy on the guy on the show floor. But yeah, I definitely want to have some feedback for after DjangoCon, and let people know kind of what insights I got out of there. This is DjangoCon's first year back after COVID, and they're doing really interesting things with virtual tickets. Uh, as of right now, the in-person tickets, it's too late for that. Um, but you can still get a virtual ticket, and we've had that conversation about our virtual conferences. What are they doing there? there will be talks that only virtual ticket holders get access to. The people that are there at the show will not get to watch these talks until after the fact. And they're going to be doing some other stuff for a lot of the virtual attendees as well. So if you're interested in that, be sure to go ahead and go to djangocon.us and grab your ticket there. I've been reassured by a lot of the organizers there that they plan to have a really fun time.
And the virtual ticket's a pretty great deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
I think it's $100.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So I think that's gonna wrap up the show. John, you got anything else?
That's all I got for this week.
I think we did have a thing, more of just hey, people who want to contribute to the show. We've been giving you a URL that no longer is going to be the URL. And I have to now type in the new URL and hope that it works and that I'm giving you the right one, because we have moved over the project to its a repo and an organization there called Python Community News. And there is a link there. If you go to topics, it is a repo that will host upcoming conferences and the topics that we talk about. If you have insight on a topic or you just want us to talk about a thing, we mostly cover current events and things that have just happened, but I definitely wouldn't be against if someone's like, hey, I really want to know how pip works. Maybe we can bring in someone from from PyPA. Maybe we can get E, or we can get, someone there to say like, hey, can you just come on the show and explain to us how this works? Because some people really wanted to know. This would be the place to go. github.com/python-community-news/topics. And don't forget, Hacktoberfest is among us. We are right in the middle of it. I know I've already gotten a couple of PRs submitted. Once again, thank you to Phoebe Quincy for joining us last week to cover that topic and how people could get involved. But we will probably have a couple of issues ourselves. If you just go to Python dash or github.com/Python community news, you'll probably see a couple of issues available, whether it's in the site, whether it's in the automations, whether it's in helping with documentation or GitHub actions. There will hopefully be some issues for people to claim and get some of that awesome Hacktoberfest swag from. But I think that's going to do it for this week. Anything else, John?
That's all I got.
All right. Well, I've been Jay Miller. You can find me on Twitter at KJY Miller. John, where can people chat with you at?
I am pretty much everywhere on the internet at Jon Banafato.
Yep. And with for the both of us, I guess this is it for this week's episode of the Python